Courage and honor, cousin.
Into the fires of battle, unto the anvil of war.
Hello, and welcome to Warhammer 40k's Grim History from the Beyond. I'm Zekthar.
And I'm Yuxin.
And we are the chroniclers of all that was, and all that will be in the 41st millennium. We've seen the rise and fall of many empires, and this month we will be talking about the Plankonious Wars.
Indeed, Zekthar, the Plankonious Wars. A war that began in 997.M41, when Big Toof invaded the Plankonious System. And the invasion started on a small planet called Oxcidine.
True, but before we get into Oxcidine, a little background on the Plankonious System. Settled during the War of Apostasy, the Plankonious System is in the far reaches of the Segmentum Pacificus. Almost directly west of Holy Terra, the system contains two suns that orbit a massive molten orb of iron called the Volkrot. These suns in turn are orbited closest by four massive planets called Macro, Mammoth, Mothra, and Meltoid, containing rare earth minerals. After these four planets, a belt of 18 worlds with rich soil, perfect for growing foodstuffs, can be found. The farthest from the twin suns are some 12 planets, none of which should have been suitable for human settlement, be it from dangerous wildlife to the harshest environments, one of which is Oxcidine.
Yes, Oxcidine, a cold and desolate planet.
Pardon me, brother, but before we get into the planet, perhaps I explain how people actually came to the system.
Fine, but make it quick.
but of course. Well, during the time of Gouge Van Deer and the madness that was the War of Apostasy, many people in the western hemisphere of the Segmentum Solar began to fear the roving bands of Van Deer, known to most as the Fraterus Templar. Now it is known, in the beginning of the Age of Apostasy, many of the Stardust chapters left the Imperium to their own devices, simply protecting the people of their founding worlds and those close to them from Xenos and Chaos incursions. This is mainly because Gouge at least hadn't messed with the chapters up to this point. But as many of you know who have listened to us, this changed very quickly, and the Black Templars along with the Soul Drinkers and a few other chapters of Dorn attacked Terra. And then...
Yes, we know, brother. What does this have to do with our story, though?
Well, you see, a new Space Marine chapter from the 21st founding.
You mean the Cursed Founding, yes? The one that produced the Lamenters, Minotaurs, and Black Dragons?
Yep. Yeah, that's the one. Well, one of these new chapters, called the Wolfhounds, were scions of the great Khan, Jagatai Khan, began to worry that they did not have the strength to hold off the Fraterus Templar, along with an incursion of Drukhari. The chapter master was caught between a rock and a hard place, and made an impossible decision. Gathering his small fleet, minus one battle barge, he engaged the Drukhari. The Fraterus Templar ships eagerly went in behind the fleet, seeking to plunder the unprotected planet and its surrounding moons to find them empty. You see, the unnamed chapter master had called for the planet and her moons to be abandoned, and following their last remaining battle barge that held their remaining gene seeds, jumped into warp space, hoping to exit the warp by the Sabbath worlds. As for the chapter master, he and the remaining Astartes beat back the Drukhari, only to be blindsided by a furious Templar fleet. What was left of the Wolfhounds were cut down, their ships silently screaming of betrayal in the void. As for the survivors, they traveled through the warp, and when they arrived back in real space, they were nowhere near where they had set out. They were about to try again, when the battle barge Serrano picked up the uninhabited system known now as the Plankonious, establishing the population of humans on the largest and most inhabitable world, one of the agri worlds in the center belt that they named Plankonious. The Wolfhounds established a new fortress on the world closest to Plankonious, which was significantly smaller, which they named Germanica. It wasn't long after this that the Wolfhounds discovered just how far off course they were, and how little was in this part of space. With no real enemies and no way or real want to contact Terra, the people of Plankonious began to flourish. This time did not last long, though, and it wasn't long before the Wolfhounds made contact with the Space Marine chapter, their sires the White Scars, and soon discovered that the Age of Apostasy was over. It was at this point that the Imperium sent its tax collectors and pilgrim ships to establish the rest of the system, hungrily devouring anything of use it could find. With such bounties, though, came troubles. And soon, other alien eyes began to look into the system, with salivating tongues licking eager lips.
Quite right, Zekdar. Now, Oxcidine was the last planet populated due to the constant foul weather that encapsulates the entire world. Well, that's if you can call it populated. But anyways, moving on.
What was the population of Oxcidine? Just out of curiosity.
Well, up until recently it was 200,000, but after they got some interesting results and started mining there, it ended up increasing to around 1 to 1.5 million.
Oh, what were they mining?
Well, I'll get to that in a bit.
Oh, okay.
Now, clear skies are basically non-existent, and as one would guess, this weather has made the planet virtually desolate. On top of this, the clouds on this planet contain some sort of unknown mystical charge that only causes severe damage to anything that touches them, but are virtually an impenetrable jamming device between the planet and outer space.
Oh, wait a minute. Mystical charges? What is it really?
Well, clouds are known to us as being communicus castativus disrumlinus clouds. Since these clouds are not warp-based and are apparently exclusive to this planet in the Milky Way, the Imperium can only classify it as mystical.
Okay.
Because of these clouds, air travel is non-existent, and the only way to land or leave safely is to wait for those clear days or somehow create a hole in them long enough to fly through.
I assume that the same could be said about their intergalactic communications.
That would be correct. It should also be noted that the lack of air transportation has made trains the main method of transportation on the planet.
With such horrible conditions, why would the Imperium inhabit it more? It's the mineral thing, right?
Right. Well, you see, in 995.M41, it was discovered that Oxcidine contains some of the rarest jewels known to man. As such, naturally, the High Lords of Terra would want them, and as such, mining on the planet started shortly thereafter. Now, in 997.M41, when Big Toof arrived in the Plankonious System, he naturally first attacked Oxcidine, because it is, in fact, the furthest planet out from the center of the system, aka the first planet reached by Big Toof.
Ah, yes. Now, speaking of Big Toof Bob, a little background on this most unusual orc. A rather smallish orc of seeming unimportance attached to a Blood Axe pirate group called the Bloods. Ironically, this group of orcs had a pretty decent working relationship with the Ordo Xenos of the Inquisition. They had been used many times by the Inquisition to act as spies and saboteurs to burgeoning orcs, making their fellow orcs easy pickings for the Imperium. Needless to say, the big boss of the Bloods didn't hold a lot of loyalties to anyone, provided the price was right. And so, according to official records, in 004.025.995 M41, poor Bob was sold to the Ordo Xenos. What awaited him was a fate most heinous, too terrible for any orc to behold.
What?
No fighting.
Oh no.
Indeed. You see, the Ordo Xenos was doing experiments on orcs, and if they stuck them in an environment that you couldn't fight, to see what the Xenos would do. Each orc was locked in a cell with different stimuli, be it seeds and farming equipment to simple holograms.
An interesting study, but knowing orcs, I expect it didn't go well.
Correct. The orcs would do everything in their power to escape, or simply go mad and kill themselves. Not a single one lasted longer than a solar week, other than Bob. Bob was given books, mostly with pictures. Now, while Bob may have not been the biggest orc, he had a cunning far greater than most of his kind. At first, he began to go insane like the rest of his captured camp, but then he began to look at the books. Bob began to read, his tiny brain getting bigger with every symbol he learned, and then every word. His body, of course, wouldn't accept such a large brain without the body, and he began to grow at an accelerated rate.
Interesting. So Bob did the opposite of most orcs.
Correct. Yes.
Okay, so for those of you who haven't listened to our orc voxes or videos, one of the things about orcs is generally they get bigger by fighting each other or congregating in one place, and it just naturally their intelligence grows as they get bigger.
Except for what happened to Bob.
Yeah.
Bob
So,
began to get smarter,
the whole-
so his body had to get bigger.
The exact opposite in this case. But before you carry on with the legend of Bob Big Tooth, a question.
Yes?
What kind of books did they give him?
Oh, let's see here. Let me look through my screen here. Most of the picture books were about the Emperor and his divine might. Much what you would give a human child of the Imperium.
And the more advanced books that didn't require pictures?
Oh, there was only a few of those. 3, in fact. The first being the famous Jane's Thunderhawk's Manual. Second being The Emperor's Light, written in the early 34th millennium by a scholar whose pen name was Herodotus. The last book was, oh no. Oh, you've got to be kidding me.
What? What was the last book?
They gave him a copy of the Ordo Xenos' latest update to Gilliman's own Codex Astartes.
What?
Yep.
Are you telling me that the book written by Primarch on how to wage war for Space Marines was given to an orc?
Yes. Yes, I am.
What? Are they morons?
Well, in their very small defense, I honestly think in their ignorance they thought the orc would never understand how to read Low Gothic. I mean, they do kind of have a point.
Until you think about it and you have the War of the Beast, and they could speak, I think, read Low Gothic.
I believe, anyways, most people think that the Beast, or those emissaries, anyways, was kind of a one-shot deal. I mean, it's very rare that you come across, although the Ordo Xenos, of all people, should know better because they have run into blood axes that have been able to speak Low Gothic. And, in fact, read Low Gothic. But...
And lest we forget Gazgul, who has also been known to speak.
Yeah, but these are like really rare occasions and normally very large war bosses, not just a pipsqueak that they picked up from a local pirate. I wholeheartedly agree with you, by the way. It was really, really dumb. But, like I said, in their defense, they probably were just so ignorant of the situation, they just kind of went, just give him something, anything. How about this book? Sure. But, let me get back to what happened. Bob wanted to escape this hell as well, but while he was learning
all the military tactics of the Imperium's greatest warriors.
Yes. While he was doing that, his brain was formulating a plan on how to get out. And that plan started with being as unorky as possible. So, act as much like the apes around him and bide his time. The second part was to observe the cell he was in, find any weaknesses he could. The only weakness he could find was the door, which was only open from the outside, which was never done. Only a small hole at the bottom of the door was slid open to give him the terrible gruel that he was supposed to eat. For the next few weeks, Bob bided his time, keeping track of when food came and when inquisitors showed up to question him. Then, just a solar month after his captivity, he escaped. Now, according to the official records of the Ordo Xenos, there was a power outage, and the space station was overrun before the squad of Death Watch on hand could exterminate the escaped captives. In reality, Bob Big Tooth, now fairly large, escaped his cell using only the books he was given and 2 paperclips. Now free, Big Tooth swore revenge on all humanity and went about gathering himself a WAAAAGH that numbered in the millions. Now at this point, most orcs would point this army towards the closest enemy and began a path of destruction, but not Big Tooth. He had different plans. Tell me, brother, why do you think the orcs haven't conquered the galaxy? After all, there are definitely enough of them.
I would say mainly the infighting They can't stop fighting each other long enough to gain any true ground.
Right. Yeah. And every time that we talk about the orcs, that is their biggest flaw. If they have no one else to fight, they'll beat the crap out of each other.
Exactly.
But
If they all decided to move in one direction,
it would be
the galaxy
scary.
would be destroyed.
That's why Gazgul is so terrifying. But this also, anyways, because of this infighting, causes their logistics to be one of the poorest in the galaxy. Bob, after reading the Codex Astartes, wanted to change that. Now, he knew there was no way he could change the fightiness in the orcs that followed him, and quite frankly, he didn't want to change that. It just seemed too un-orky. What he did realize is that he could circumvent this by carving out an empire in a quieter part of the galaxy. If he could take a system that was just a little out of the way, and one that was big enough, he could use that as a stepping stone to bigger prizes.
Like what?
I honestly can't say, but if I could hazard a guess, what with him starting his campaign in the Pacificus Segmentum, he probably has an eye on the Sabbath Wars. But to Bob Big Tooth, the Plankonious System is a perfect place to start. Out of the way, of decent size for a good scrap, and even some beakies to kick around. The only downside was it wasn't quite as far out of the way as he would have liked. It was one of the closer systems to the solar segment, so speed would be important for his woo. He knew he needed to take as many planets as possible before the Imperium could react. But a couple of things were already set against him before his space hulks dropped into real space. The first was a whole company of Crimson Fists had arrived in orbit around Germanica just before his arrival. They were there for their once centennial pledge of mutual loyalty with the Wolfhounds, led by Pedro Cantor himself. He has come to ask for aid from the Wolfhounds due to his chapter almost being erased by Snagrod when they invaded Rin's world in 989.m41. The second issue was the Plankonious System had become somewhat of a training system for the Astra Militarum on its way to reinforce those fighting in the Sabbath Crusade.
Training system? I thought the Astra Militarum wasn't big on training their troops. Just used them primarily as meat shields for artillery bombardments.
True, and usually that is the case. But with the Sabbath Crusades grinding to a halting stalemate, the upper echelon of command is trying something slightly different.
Really?
Well, it also provides the system with support troops so they can skeletonize their planetary defenses, turning them all into Astra Militarum regiments and sending them to the Sabbath worlds, giving the Crusade a 2.5 billion personnel boost.
Ah, there it is. The truth rings in.
Yes, well, regardless, the reason why the system makes such a good training ground is because of the outer rim of planets. These worlds hold about every environment you could think of. Perfect for a crash course in such exercises in surviving cold weather environments, jungle warfare, and actual naval warfare. Not, like in space, but on, the water. Another group that has shown up before Big Boss Bob is the first fleet of Ostroians, firstborn, heading to the Sabbath worlds. About 1.7 million of them have been dispersed to the worlds of the Outer Rim, conducting different drills and specific training. What these poor Ostroians are about to find out is their training is about to turn into a real combat, real quick, with an enemy a little more green than they expected, especially on Oxcidine.
Yes, the small planet of Oxcidine, which, to put bluntly, didn't really have much strategic value. Because of this, the planet's only protection in space was one Imperial cruiser and 2 Imperial light cruisers. Such a meager fleet would have no chance, facing a full war, and were easily destroyed. Seeing how pitifully the planet was guarded, Big Boss Bob decided to send only 5 rocks to the planet before moving on to find a bigger, better fight. The majority of the landing forces, comprising of Goths and Death Skulls, headed west to fight against the Duggan Kriegsmen and 3 squads of Crimson Fists, while the remainder headed east to fight the Vostroyans.
Hold on. Kriegsmen? I didn't have any notes on the Krieg being shipped with this fleet to the Sabbath worlds.
Well, they weren't. They were actually already stationed there.
Why?
Remember when I told you the planet was rich in rare stones?
Yeah. Oh, I see. There is a guard unit for the stones.
Correct. The High Lords of Terra wanted a guard that is used to both Death Worlds and trench warfare. The latter being that they wanted the Imperial Guard to build defenses around the mines. As for the Vostroyans, well, that's to do with training.
Right.
This particular group had the misfortune to have just started doing drills on Oxcidine when, whoa, Big Toof arrived.
Real quick, what were they training for on Oxcidine? Doesn't seem like there's much there to train for.
The Vostroyans were training for plants that have auspex and long-distance communication issues and don't really have any aerial recon or support availability.
Oh, because of the fog. Interesting.
Yes, well, moving on. Like I said, the orcs crashed their rocks into the center of the main continent for two reasons. One, it split the Vostroyan armies from the Krieg and the 3 squads of Crimson Fists. And two, it's harder to miss the continent when you aim at the center. The battles that we will be talking about and the key to an orcish victory were on the east side of the continent, led by Boss Claw Squigwig. But before we get into the battle itself, let me explain who is fighting in this imperial disaster. First off, we have the Vostroyans, split into 3 major forces. We have the 2 smaller forces, being the 1st and 10th Army, who do not take part of this battle, and the 2nd, which consists mainly of infantry, some 150,000, along with the 75th Tank Regiment, consisting of 100 Leman Resses, the 7th and 8th Brigade of Bombast Artillery, and 75 Basilisks from the mighty 90th. They also had armored support for the infantry, some 200 Sentinels, 50 Chimera armored transports, and 25 Hounds. Unfortunately for the Vostroyans, the heavy, statically altering fog caused the Basilisks to be all but useless in the coming fray. This large force was led by 2 men who did not get along. The first was General Yakov Zelensky, a smart and cunning leader, but unfortunately rather timid when it came to dealing with his superiors and those of the same rank. Yakov is in charge of the infantry support, which causes problems along the way. General Alexander Samsonov is the exact opposite of Zelensky. He is bullish, stubborn, and not nearly as tactically sound as his counterpart. His idea of a battle is to mulch the infantry into the enemy lines until the artillery could turn the enemy to paste. When the orcs first landed, the Vostroyans reacted quickly. The 2nd split up with the 1st Army in the north, and
more about them later.
And headed south so they could cover more ground, spread out, and not get pinned in the north. Samsonov caught wind of the orcs marching to meet them, so consolidating his and Zelensky's forces, moved west to meet the green-skinned cuz. The orcs, on the other hand, are led by Boss Claw Squigwig, but he has to work with 2 other bosses, which I'll get to in a minute. Most of what Squigwig runs is the boys, aka infantry, some 100,000 orc boys, 25,000 flashgits, and 5,000 Squighog riders. The 2 bosses underneath him are Munchin Mad Hoffman, who runs a massive 20,000 group of speed freaks and evil sons. Munchin has little time for planning, he's too busy racing around in his Draxman. He hates sitting still, and the only thing he hates more than that is orcs that seem to enjoy sitting still. Like Big Bad Ludendorff, or just Big Dwarf for short. Dwarf is truly a monster of his species, and would probably run a war of his own, except his brain didn't really develop with his size, and is dumb even by the standards of his race. Regardless of his idiocy, he is still quite large and demands respect of those around him. Needless to say, Bob Big Toof gave him artillery to use on a small planet away from causing too much trouble. Dwarf controls 100 cannons, 25 mega cannons, and 25 monster guns that he pulls behind his steam boy, aka train.
Yes, I must mention here, it's kind of ironic that the how quickly the orcs actually started using the railway system to move themselves around. Every once in a while, the orcs do seem to show quite a bit of ingenuity.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to getting to fights faster.
Yeah. Well, it's old tech, and as you know, snake bites like older tech stuff.
Yes. True.
They're the ones that use squigs for their speed freaks. They use them like squig powder battle wagons and
Radas. Sorry. So what is Squigwig's plan?
Well, I'll let Squigwig summarize his strategy in his own words, and I quote,
"We not just beat the Yumi, we must crump him and his boys. Then we can crump the other enemy whatever, who thinks they can do what they want to our ground."
Huh?
To translate, they must do more than just stop Samsonov. He needed to be annihilated before they turned north to deal with Rennenkampf.
Oh, okay.
For the moment, Samsonov would be opposed only by the forces he was already facing, a front line of snakebites with some flash kits in support. To make things a bit easier, we will refer to this group as the First Orc Mob. The bulk of the Vostroyan Second Army was still coming towards the front. If necessary, they would be allowed to push further west, past the Dema River, while the Orc reinforcements assembled on the flanks, poised to encircle the invaders. Zelensky had agreed to Samsonov's proposal to start the Second Army's advance further westward than originally planned, separating them even further from Rennenkampf's First Army. The first day, Samsonov's forces encountered orcs all along their front and pushed them back in several places. Zelensky ordered his armor to support them and encouraged the infantry onwards to glory. This was a hard ask, especially for a tank commander to infantry units that had been advancing for 6 days in sweltering heat without sufficient rest along primitive roads, and had outrun their supplies. The next day, they attacked the First Orc Mob, which retreated back to the west side of the Dema River. The Australians forded the river at night, and on the third day, they attacked again. The now partially entrenched First Mob temporarily stopped their advance before retreating to the northwest to avoid possible encirclement. Samsonov saw a wonderful opportunity because, as far as he was aware, both of his flanks were unopposed. He ordered most of his units to the northwest, leaving only his 6th Corps, some 20,000 standard infantry, and Zelensky's 200 Sentinels, called the Sterling Sentinels, to continue north towards the original objective, connecting with the 1st and 10th Armies. He did not have enough skilled cavalry,
Who, I might add, were all in the First Army in the north.
and he wasn't about to ask that weasel Zelensky for his Sentinels' assistance to scout out the orcs' positions, which were, unfortunately for him, building up on his left flank. On day 3, Boss Claw Squigwig met with Big Dwarf and went over some radio intercepts the Dwarf's mech boys caught, mainly because Dwarf couldn't understand what they were saying. With the information Dwarf's mech boys had discovered, along with his Squighog scouts, Squigwig had a pretty good idea where his enemy was. With this information, Squigwig planned an encirclement of the Vostroyan Second Army. Big Dwarf's mob and the First Orc Mob would attack from the south across the river, while Squigwig's Squig Riders and the Second Orc Mob, which contained the rest of the Snakebites and Flashkits, attacked the Vostroyan's right flank. On the way back to his headquarters, Squigwig received new information. Rennenkampf heard that things were going well from Alexander. So instead of reinforcing him, he continued due west to strengthen the east side of the river, and then push south, hopefully crushing the Greenskins. Samsonov made it very clear he didn't need any help from Rennenkampf, no matter what that sniveling Zelensky said. Klaw was happy to hear this, yet still not fully trusting it, sent his first mob to form a new defensive flank along the Dayma River, while his main line strengthened their defenses. Zelensky was concerned by the orcs' resistance with their earlier advance, and the rare recon they had gathered spotted the arrival of Big Dwarf's forces from the south. Zelensky and Samsonov could not reach an agreement on the direction of the army. The dispute over the direction of the attack resulted in a compromise. On the third day, the Second Army was sent northeast, leaving the Sixth Corps on the move as flexible rearguard, which unfortunately separated it from the rest of the army by 2.5 marches and thereby exposing it to Dorf's significantly larger force. These negotiations, as well as the negotiations about a day's rest, which Zelensky insistently demanded, led to the fact that, apart from the Sixth Corps, the army barely moved on the fourth day. Then the Second Army was off, and Boss Klaus Squigwig was waiting for them. Munchin Mad Hoffman commenced his attack early on the fourth day, with his speed freaks speeding past the frustrated Dorf, crashing into the second on the southern flank. By the end of the day, the Sentinels were nothing but slag, and all of Zelensky's rear guard was dead, and a new head graced the hood of Munchin's dragster, a general by the name of Yakov Zelensky. Seeing no reason to stop, Munchin gave Dorf the bird, and then sped off to the northwest. North of Hoffman, the first orc mob faced the Vostroyan 2nd Infantry Division, which fell back with heavy losses. On Samsonov's right flank, the Vostroyans soon faced Squigwig's Squig Riders, and the second orc mob. The second mob, to the right of Squigwig's Squig Riders, advanced to cut off any means of escape. The Squig Riders advanced towards the second center. The Vostroyan 4th Infantry Division suffered heavy losses, but began to repel the orc cavalry with their heavy bolters. Things seemed to be looking up for the Vostroyans, but that's when Munchin showed up. Munchin Mad Hoffman zipped in behind the Vostroyan forces, cackling madly as he threw squig bombs out his window and firing his snaz gun. With Squigwig's infantry now encircling them like a cauldron, Munchin smashed into their backside like an angry bolt of lightning. Samsonov was not in the so-called cauldron, and unaware of the peril his soldiers were in because he was trying to observe the action from a rise in the ground a distance from his wireless set, and reports were not relayed to him. In vain, he glared through his binoculars, trying to see where the enemy was, and, as if by the Emperor's grace, the ever-present fog lifted, so the general had just enough time to see his army ground to paste.
Wait a minute. The speed freaks killed them all? And that's kind of a tall order. I mean, after all, they still had quite a bit of armor and even artillery.
Well, like I was about to say.
Oh. Sorry.
The Vostroyans are a hardy breed and only the firstborn fight in the Astra Militarum, and they have a reputation to keep. Hardened soldiers all, they stiffened their lines and repelled the speed freaks for a time. Just long enough for Big Dwarf to show up. With the fog gone, his mech boys could range the enemy. Not only that, but Munchin was in the fire zone. Perhaps he might die a horrible fiery death. With an evil chuckle, Dwarf grabbed the nearest grot. With a bellow, hurled him towards the enemy. That was the signal for all of his cannons to open fire. and soon the Vestroyans were nothing more than paste.
And what about Munchin?
Quicker than most, he barked at his boys to vacate the area, and he only took minimal losses.
I'm assuming much to the chagrin of Big Dwarf. But, sorry.
Those few Vostroyans that were outside of the cauldron realized the battle was lost and headed north, hoping to link up with Rennenkampf. Samsonov, not being able to handle his defeat, disappeared into the woods that night and committed suicide. Now, the Second Army lost approximately 85,000 infantrymen, 40,000 heavy weapons, 385 bombasts, 85 Lehman Russes, all 25 of the Hellhounds, 30 Chimeras, and all 200 Sentinels. Meanwhile, the orcs lost 20,000 boys, 5,000 flash gits, 3,000 speed freaks, mostly to friendly fire, and 1,000 squig hog riders. Now, there were multiple reasons for the defeat of the Second Army, for example, moving too fast to have proper supply chain, continuing to press on past the original point established, causing a large gap between the First and Second Armies. But the main reason for the defeat of the Second Army lies in Samsonov's neglect of radio communication, as a result of which they attacked blindly, whereas the orcs knew about his exact location. Samsonov, due to the fact that he went to find the nearest hell to determine what was going on, didn't realize the danger until it was far too late. Now, brother, why don't you tell us about the battle that broke the camel's back?
Certainly. Well, due to the success of their first assault, Squeak needed very little persuading to point the whole orc army north and try to take out the first army of Vestroyans. Using very similar tactics as the first battle, Squigwig moved north faster than anybody expected, thanks to Oxidine's railway networks. Stuffing as many of his orc boys around Dorf's artillery, they moved north, with Munchin and his speed freaks providing a rather speedy escort. They moved so fast that word had just trickled into Vostroyan command about the time the orcs arrived, taking them by complete surprise. Swarming off the trains, the orc snakebites reformed in front of the spread out Vostroyan's 1st and 10th armies and pushed it back across its entire front, trying again to encircle and eliminate the Vostroyans. This proved difficult because the Vostroyans had spread out a lot further than the Second Army, meaning to encircle them would prove difficult. It in fact didn't take long before the hardy Vostroyans began to set up heavy bolter positions across a fallback line, slowing down the orc advance. Realizing his initial attack had been stopped, Squigwig reluctantly held his troops back, so Mad Munchin could get into position in the north and try to sweep in on the Vostroyans' left flank, while Dorf set up his artillery in the south, trying to blanket the Vostroyans with a constant barrage on their right, hopefully boxing them in. Squigwig pulled his boys back behind the Dama River, which ran north to south, and with an angry grunt kicked the grot before getting up on his Squighog Grumple. He would have to wait, and he hated waiting. The Vostroyans, on the other hand, were more than happy to wait, and this time were a little better off command-wise than the Second Army, being led by General Paul von Rennenkampf, who was being advised by Sergeant Juan Fernandez of the Crimson Fists. And so it was. For 2 days, the orcs and the Vostroyans repositioned their troops. The orcs chomping at the bit on the west side of the Dama River, and the Vostroyans desperately trying to get stuck in on the east bank. On the third day, the few survivors of the Second Army began to trickle into the First Army's position, bolstering the Vostroyans as well as giving High Command vital information on who was in charge of the orcs, something that Fernandez took particular interest in. You see, Fernandez was a veteran of many battles against the Greenskins, and knew very well that if you were able to kill their leader, there was a good chance the rest would scatter and begin infighting. Against Rennenkampf's wishes, Fernandez began to prepare his 10-man interceptor squad for a hunt for Squigwig. News of where the boss was did not take long, because on the fourth morning, Squigwig had snuck his bodyguard of 50 knob hog riders to a rather large hill just east of the Dama, hoping that as daylight came, the fog would lift just enough for him to get a little more perspective and hopefully get an idea of where to set up Dorf's artillery. On that day, the fog did begin to lift, which pleased Squigwig, especially after finding out that his hog riders had stumbled upon a brigade of some 500 Vestroians, who were tiredly marching up the east side of the hill. He assumed for the same reason he was there. With a happy bellow, he kicked Grumple, and the Squig hog snarled as he began to run down the hill, and he was soon joined by his eager biggins. Panicked, the Vostroians quickly began to fire up at the hog riders, but all their las rifles seemed to do was irritate the hogs, who roared as they plunged into the infantry. Hacking and slashing, the orcs quickly got stuck in, and the Vostroians lost their nerve and began to flee. The hog riders harried them down the hill, butchering any too slow to escape, and Squigwig would probably have chased them until they were all dead, yet he heard a horn call that gave him pause. Pulling up on his reins, when that didn't work, he clunked Grumple on the head hard enough that the beast staggered and then finally slowed. Standing in his stirrups, he roared with approval. At the bottom of the hill to his left were Hoomies on horses. Hearing the commotion, the Vostroians' 2nd Hussar Cavalry, which was planning their own scouting mission across the river, came across the slaughter and decided to intervene. With the sound of rolling thunder, the 500 horsemen charged across the hill. Even though his blood was up, Squigwig was no fool, and bellowing at his boys to retreat back to the river, all the while hollering into his radio to the snakebites on the west side of the river.
Wedding be over! We fight!
He roared with glee as his riders rolled over the top of the hill back to the river, with the hussars nipping at their heels. Fernandez had heard on the Vox what was happening, and suspecting Squigwig was there, set his Astartes in motion. Seeing that the Space Marine might be right, especially with the Orc Chief being as vulnerable as he was just simply too tempting for General Paul von Rannenkopf to resist, and sent the 10th Army, led by Infantry General Vasily Flug, some 97,084 men, 192 heavy bolters, and the majority of the tanks that the 10th and 1st Armies had, some 150 Lehman Russ tanks along with 50 Chimeras. At first things went well. The massive force of Australians assembled quickly and began storming across the river, eagerly being led by the Crimson Fists, who were in turn egged on by the reports of the Hussars being hot on the heels of Squigwig. Infantry ran behind the tanks and the Chimeras as they quickly crossed the river, but it wasn't long before Fernandez began to slow. The fog had returned, and with it, Vox communications became dodgy at best. This didn't make any sense. Orcs didn't usually run away this quickly. Something was wrong. He halted his men just as he heard something that would turn the bowels of a normal man. All around him it came, a deafening roar. Sergeant Fernandez began to bark instructions immediately into his Vox to the Vostroians, demanding their halt. But Vasily Flug either didn't hear the Vox or refused the order, because he continued to push his soldiers on. He was mistaken that the Orcish cry was coming from the front, and while he was chilled by how many voices he heard, he was comforted by how large his own force was, and figured that he could handle any rabble of orcs. What Fernandez realized, and Flug did not, was while the orcs were in fact in front of them, they were also to the left and right of them. Hidden by the fog, the orcs had successfully led them down a hall of greenskins, so to speak, and the war cry was a signal to attack. Now, this roar was not just for a signal for Squigwig's boys to attack, but also the cry Mad Munchin had been waiting for. Far to the north of Squigwig, Munchin had already crossed the river and was waiting to charge in the north. With a mad cackle, he revved the engine of his shock jump dragster, released the brake, and rocketed forward, ahead of his 17,000 boys, driving and racing everything from squig buggies to war bikes. Meanwhile, on the other flank of the Australians at the south, Big Dwarf was having problems. He was used to seeing the enemy. That way he knew what to shoot at. Early in the morning he'd been happy because the fog had lifted, but was grumpy again because it had come back. While he was slower than the other bosses, he still became antsy when he heard the roar of the boys in the north. He needed something to hit, but couldn't see what to hit. In a rage, he kicked the closest grot into the fog and then thumped another one on the head. Feeling a little better, he came up with a plan, which he thought was genius, but most would find simple. Taking his artillery, he began to move north, and he figured that he would keep moving towards the humans until he could see them, and then he'd shoot them. With a roar of his infantry, Squigwig wheeled his big ones around and was joined by the rest of the army's 4,000 Squig Riders. The Hussars didn't even know what hit them, as they were crushed underfoot. Not a single one of the Hussars survived. They died so quickly, in fact, that they couldn't even radio in when it happened. But the rest of the army was about to find out. Squigwig hit the 10th Armored Division about the time his 15,000 flash kits hit the Vostroyans from the left and right. Under the cover of the roaring snaz guns, 15,000 tank busters rushed forward, hitting the Lehman Russ tanks with stick bombs, rockets, and tank buster bombs. It was only a matter of minutes before black smoke mixed with the morning fog, and the smell of blood and molten slag filled the air. Men screamed as they burned alive in chimeras, as burner boys roasted the outer shell, melting them like tin cans. Needless to say, Squigwig was having a grand time. His plan had worked. He laughed as he smashed the skull of a Vostroyan with his chopper, but the laughter died in his throat as he noticed a small force in the center of the tank squad had begun to show signs of resistance. Curious more than upset, he nudged Grumple towards the group to find a small group of beaky boys, giving his lads the what for. Sergeant Fernandez and his men had become a beacon for the Vostroyan tank crews, a lighthouse in a sea of green. The few remaining tanks began to circle the Astartes as surviving Vostroyans, added the sound of their las guns and heavy bolters to that of his own men's bolters. As Fernandez hurled a grenade at a clump of oncoming orcs, he growled to himself. This was not where he wanted to be. His men needed speed and maneuverability to be their ally, not this slog-down war that the Militarum was so well known for. Yet he knew that if he and his men took off, the 10th was surely doomed. Without something to move towards, the Vostroyans would surely break and then be chopped to pieces. He was about to bark at his men to start a fighting retreat when he saw something that gave him hope. It appeared out of the fog as a monstrous visage. It was Squigwig. Perhaps if he killed the beast, it would give the Vostroyans time to make the most of it. Motioning to his Astartes, he activated his jump pack and launched himself at the monster. Squigwig grinned wickedly as he watched the Space Marine hurtle towards him. He kicked Grumple forward as he hurled a stick bomb at the descending Astartes, catching him off guard. With a crumping sound, the grenade went off, knocking Fernandez from the air and sending him crashing to the ground. And before he could get up, Grumple was on him, his teeth chomping down on the beaky boy's shoulder plate. The Squig Hog began to shake the Astartes, trying to rip his arm off, as it had with many of Squigwig's now dead enemies. Yet this was no mere human, nor orc. This was an Astartes, an angel of war. Pulling his combat knife from its sheath, Fernandez sliced cleanly through Grumple's throat, slaying the beast with a single stroke. Squigwig roared in shock as his mount collapsed underneath him. All the while, Fernandez quickly got to his feet, bolter racked and firing with one hand as he steadied it with his other hand that was holding the knife. Gore exploded around Squigwig as bolter shells slammed into the corpse of Grumple. Hiding behind the corpse for a second, the orc boss tossed another stick bomb over his stewed mount. Fernandez was ready this time and ducked to the side, but it gave the orc enough time to do something that did catch the sergeant by surprise. Grabbing the tail of Grumple, he swung it like a club in a wide arc, smashing the Astartes to the side and sending him flying into a Lehman Russ. As he got to his feet, he was struck again by the Squig Hog. This time, Claw Squigwig had hurled it at the Astartes, and then came barreling in after it. As he pushed the carcass off him, he felt pain in his left shoulder as he gasped in surprise. The orc had followed after his Squig attack with a chop from his monstrous axe like Choppa, taking Fernandez's left arm clean off. With a growl, Fernandez raised his bolter. From this range, accuracy was meaningless. He couldn't miss. 3 rounds punched into the orc as Squigwig plunged his Choppa down again, taking Fernandez's right arm. Staggering backwards, the orc looked down at his chest and growled with menace. Gripping his Choppa, he roared and was about to finish the sergeant off when he looked up, howled, and dove out of the way as bolter shells rained down from Sergeant Fernandez's 5 remaining Astartes. They all dropped to the ground, surrounding their wounded sergeant, 3 laying down cover fire as 2 hauled him to his feet. Then, they all took to the sky in a full retreat. The Crimson Fist would get their revenge, but on another day of their choosing. Unfortunately, with the loss of Sergeant Fernandez and his Astartes falling back rather quickly, the lighthouse was swallowed by the sea of green, all to be food for the Squigs and the Choppa blades. With the loss of their armor and being surrounded, the rest of the Australians broke and tried to flee back across the river. Getting loose Vox chatter from what was going on, General Paul von Rennenkampf advanced the First Army, 150,000 Australian infantry, the rest of the Hussars some 3,000 cavalry, and what remained of the artillery, some 300 bombasts. His hope was to be able to cover Pflug's retreat long enough for his artillery to get into position, and then start shelling the west side of the river. Of the 97,000 men that went across the river, only about 5,000 of them made it back onto the east side. For what it's worth, General Vasily Pflug stayed on the west side of the river with his honor guard, holding off the orcs as long as possible so his men could escape across the ford. By the time the orcs cut him to pieces, you could not see the ground around him. He had slaughtered so many of the greenskins. Blood-drunk, the orcs charged across the river, heedless of what the enemy was doing. They began to slow as the river got deeper, making them perfect targets for the heavy bolt gunners. The orcs couldn't get past the river, but were in no mood to retreat. Dying in the thousands, it looked like the battle would turn in Rennenkampf's favor. But that's when Munchen arrived, hitting the flank like a hurricane of flesh and steel, with a sound of thundering engines. They began to roll right through the Austrian defenses. Suddenly, those orcs that couldn't make it across the river didn't seem so important, as the heavy gunners shifted their target to the north. It didn't seem to do much other than slightly slow down the speed freaks, but that's when the roar of the bombasts echoed across the land, and shells began to rain down on the speed freaks. With a bark of surprise, Munchen wheeled his speed freaks around and got them just out of reach of the Imperial guns. The bombasts had saved the battle, making a shield of raining fire to the north, giving the infantry time to start setting up defenses against the speed freaks, all the while resuming to mow down the orcs trying to cross the river. And that's when Big Dwarf made his presence known. Very big way.
Oh yeah, I'd almost forgotten about him.
Yes, well, he had been slowly creeping forwards towards the sound of battle. He had even been lucky and found some large bridges to cross the Dama River and get on the east side. Yet as they rumbled forward, he was getting impatient. This was just like Squeakwig, sticking him in the back so that he and Munchen could have all the fun. He was almost about to leave the cannons and just charge ahead when the bombasts began to fire. They were close. So close, in fact, that he could see the flashes of their muzzles through the fog. Using a rare glimmer of cunning, Big Dwarf spread his artillery out, all 100 cannons and 25 mega cannons he had at his disposal. He gave a bark of command and all of his cannons roared to life, firing nearly at point blank into the backs of the surprised bombast crews. There was much wreckage and carnage, yet there were simply too many targets to get them all in one shot, and the remaining bombasts were quickly turned around to return fire. It was at this moment General Paul von Rennenkampf made his final mistake. Moving up to encourage his men, he had no idea his rear guard was being attacked by Big Dwarf. He doesn't realize he and his men are in a very precarious position. What he thinks is he has the orc infantry pinned on the west side of the river, while his artillery is keeping the orcs' mechanized troops off his infantry to the north. If his men could dig in and hold the position they were in, they would eliminate the orcs to the west, or they would eventually tire of dying in droves. Then he could use the effective artillery to move in a rolling barrage, crushing or at very least pushing back the orcs in the north.
That sounds like a good plan if it wasn't for Big Dwarf.
Right you are, Yusuf. What he doesn't realize is his shield is about to go down, and he didn't figure that out quite fast enough, because...
Let me guess, Mad Munchen figured it out before he did.
Right again. Now, seeing no more shells blowing up in his general direction, he gunned his engine, and his speed freaks charged back into the fray. The Australian infantry changed targets again, but this gave relief to the orcs on the west bank, who began to make it across the river. Seeing the battle was lost, Rennenkampf tried to have his men fall back, but that's when they began to get shelled by orcish artillery, who had finished off the bombasts. By the end of the day, there was nothing left of the Australians. They had all been slaughtered to a man. The only survivors of the battle were 5 Astartes who had hightailed it out of the death trap long before the final chop and crunch against the last skull.
Well, in the end, with the Australians being completely wiped out in the east, Squigwig and his army wheeled west, and bolstering the orcs that were fighting in those regions, it wasn't long before the planet lay under orcish control.
Indeed, brother. And it wasn't long before the orc mech boys began to build more ships and gargants for the rest of the WAAAAGH, the idols of their foul gods echoing green energy across the galaxy. It wouldn't be long before more orcs arrived to join Big Toof's WAAAAGH.
Yet the orcs' victory wasn't total. The Crimson Fist's frigate, Orc's Bane, returned for their battle brothers and found the Orc War, killing everything on the planet in war. Mounting a desperate escape plan, the 3 squads and Fernandez's 5 were able to escape to the ship, and then made for the planet Germanica to warn Pedro Cantor, along with his honor guard and the Wolfhounds. With the Stardays now in the know, whoa, Big Toof would find taking the Plankonious System much more difficult.
Indeed, Yuxin. Yet before we go, what do you think of this first world's demise and the Plankonious Wars in general?
Well, I think this shows that blood axes aren't the only people that can make good plans.
I was gonna say, he might have a little blood axe in his blood. Squigwig. Because this seems almost un-orky, especially in that first battle. There's a lot of feints and maneuvering there that just doesn't seem a whole lot like what an orc would do.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Most orcs.
Yeah, most.
I will say anyways that once they get bigger, they do get scary smart too.
Yeah.
So not only that, but he also used anyways the aspect of, quite frankly, I mean, for those anyways that know, like for instance the Battle of Marathon, you know, or something like that anyways, the aspect of, or actually the Battle of Cannae with shoot, what's his name? Oh, the guy with one eye that marched over the Alps. With the elephants. Carthaginian. Hannibal. Yeah. Where the aspect is that the enemy is allowed to push what pretty much happened in that first battle is that he allowed the enemy to push him into like this glove. And then that glove literally hardened around him, and then you take your fast, well, Hannibal took his fast cavalry. But Squeakwig took his speed freaks and literally started pummeling them from behind so that they couldn't do anything about it. And then on top of that, when you've got artillery like Dwarf, wonder what'll happen to Dwarf. He seems like someone, anyways, a big boss would want around because he's too stupid to take over. But then again, he might be too stupid to be valuable. I don't know. But we probably haven't seen the last of these guys. As far as I know, though, in like the next... They are, at this point anyways, officially just on this planet.
Right.
Building stuff. They will eventually move on, but because there are plenty of worlds to conquer. But right now, anyways, they're rebuilding. But, I mean, this definitely, anyways... normally, anyways, when you look at Orc WAAAGHs, the first planet, it just always sucks to be the first planet.
Because there's no warning.
Yeah, there's no warning. No one knows it's coming.
Yeah,
and then all of a sudden, hundreds of thousands of millions of greenskins. Just all, yeah, and you're just dead.
Yeah.
If you're lucky, you're able to get, like these guys were anyways, to get at least a few people off the planet so they could warn everybody else.
Yeah.
But on that note, we are out of time for today. Now tune in next time as Boss Big Toof makes planetfall himself and attacks the planet of Mary Jane.
Fantastic. But for those of you who enjoyed our little show, could you please be so kind as to push that subscribe, like, or follow button? And if you wish to help us expand our work on 40k lore, by all means, support us by joining our membership program on our YouTube channel, Tales of Ashraka. Oh, and don't forget to purchase the Yoda Knights, sold wherever ebooks are sold. And that's spelled with a J.
Yes. And most importantly, have a great day. And until next time, this is Ekthar
And Yuxin.
signing off.